On the morning of September 21st, 2001, Ana Montes awoke early and stepped into her shower. She turned on the hot water, letting the steam fill the room, then began using her numerous bars of soaps, switching from one to another, methodically scrubbing every inch of her body. It was as if she were trying to wash away a secret that clung to her skin. Stepping out, she dressed quickly. Her apartment in the upscale Cleveland Park neighborhood of Washington, D.C. was spotless and meticulously organized, with not a single thing seemingly out of place, or so she believed. Moments later, she headed out in a red Toyota Echo, cruising along the highway. She drove. Ana braced herself for a demanding day ahead. She worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and in the 10 days since Middle Eastern terrorists had hijacked planes and attacked both the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the atmosphere had been intense. Normally, a chief analyst on Cuban intelligence worked in an area far removed from Middle Eastern affairs. But now, with the nation preparing for war, every available hand was needed, even those outside the immediate conflict zone. On any other day, Ana might have noticed that a car was tailing her. But today, her mind was fixed on work, and she paid no attention to her surroundings. Upon arriving at the office, she settled into her desk. Just as she began her tasks, her phone rang. It was Dave Curtin, a senior intelligence official. His usual friendly tone was replaced by something curt and impatient, though Ana assumed it was simply the strain of the national emergency. Curtin explained there was a problem with one of her employees' time cards, and he had no time to resolve it himself. He asked if she could head to the Inspector General's office to sort it out. Without hesitation, Ana agreed. Administrative issues like this were routine for her since taking on the role of acting division chief. She walked briskly to the 4th floor, where a receptionist directed her to a conference room. When Ana opened the door, she expected to find an employee with a time card issue. Instead, she saw 2 FBI agents waiting. One of them looked her directly in the eye and said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage. The United States and Cuba have been locked in an intense spy game ever since communist revolutionary Fidel Castro overthrew a U.S.-backed dictatorship in Havana in 1959, practically overnight. America had a hostile neighbor less than 100 miles from Key West, Florida. Both nations scrambled to gather intelligence on one another, each desperate for an advantage. Cuba's close alignment with the Soviet Union during the Cold War was a constant source of anxiety for U.S. officials, pushing the two countries dangerously close to nuclear war in the early 1960s. Yet, even after the Soviet Union collapsed and the Cold War thawed in 1989, hostility between Cuba and the United States persisted. Each side continued working relentlessly to plant agents deep inside the other's governments, sometimes with shocking success. Ana Montes was one of the most unlikely double agents in that shadow war. By every account, she excelled at her job, which centered on gathering critical intelligence against the Cuban government. At the time of her arrest, she had access to some of America's most closely guarded secrets. She was also the sister of not just one, but 2 FBI agents, and related to 2 more, committed to serving their country at any cost. So what could drive Ana to betray her nation? How could she turn her back on such a deeply patriotic family? And how did she manage to operate undetected for so many years, right in the heart of the U.S. intelligence community? This is a story decades in the making, one that exposes disturbing truths about how easily traitors can hide in plain sight. Ana Montes was 15 the day her father left their home for good. It was 1972, in the Baltimore suburbs. She sat in the bedroom she shared with her younger sister Lucy, waiting nervously. Her father, Alberto, had been calling each of her 3 siblings into his office, one by one. Kana, the eldest, was last. Lucy returned to their room wearing a blank, stony expression. Ana searched her sister's face for some clue of what had been said, but Lucy offered nothing. Once, they had been inseparable, but as adolescence set in, they had started drifting apart. Lucy simply told Ana that their father wanted to speak to her. Ana considered giving her sister a hug, but hesitated, unsure if it would be welcome now. Instead, she rose silently and walked toward their father's office. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. Alberto asked her to sit. As she looked into his dark eyes, she could not stop the flood of memories times he had lashed out, the violence he had inflicted. Alberto had come to the U.S. mainland from Puerto Rico to work as a doctor for the Army, eventually moving the family to Kansas while he studied psychotherapy at the prestigious Menninger Psychiatric Hospital. Ironically, his research focused on how domineering parents could inflict lasting psychological harm on their children. Whatever insights he uncovered, he never applied them at home. Alberto's temper was volatile and cruel, and he often targeted Ana in particular. Sitting now in the very chair where she had once feared, she might suffocate under his rage. She wanted to cry, but she had learned long ago that tears only made things worse. Clearing his throat, Alberto told her plainly that her mother, Amelia, was divorcing him and wanted him out of the house. Then he asked if she wanted to live with him in his new apartment. Like all her siblings, Ana declined. When Alberto left, the household felt lighter, free from his shadow. Ana, the rift-earning 3.9 GPA, and joining in on the Hispanic Unity marches her mother helped organize. But she and Lucy continued to drift apart. Determined to carve out her own independence, Ana would sometimes sleep in the basement instead of their shared bedroom, where she hung a poster of South American revolutionary Che Guevara. She felt a kinship with those who resisted oppression, much as she wished she could have resisted her father. By the time she graduated high school and left for the University of Virginia, her relationship with Lucy was polite but distant, without their father's abuse to unite them. The sisters embarked on separate paths that would eventually put them on opposite sides of the intelligence war. In the fall of 1977, Ana dashed down a street in Madrid, laughing as she ran. "Come on, keep up," she called to her friend, Mimi. The two had become inseparable during their months studying abroad, both Puerto Rican, fiercely independent, and determined to challenge a world they believed was unjust. Together, they had joined demonstrations in Madrid against U.S. support for Spanish dictator Francisco Franco's regime, and debated the damaging effects of American foreign policy on other nations. For Ana, Mimi felt like a new kind of sister. That evening, they carried bottles of wine up a narrow staircase and knocked on the door of a modest flat. Ricardo Fernando Ayers opened it, and Ana immediately threw her arms around him. She ran her fingers through his dark curls and kissed him deeply. They had met on a train from Barcelona to Madrid, and Ana was drawn to the sensitive-eyed Argentinian who had fled his own country's authoritarian dictatorship. In Ricardo, she found both a romantic partner and a political ally. Inside the apartment, friends greeted them warmly. Ana poured wine, and the group settled in to talk, sharply criticizing the United States and its support for violent regimes. Mimi voiced her belief that Puerto Rico should be free from American control, independent at last. Though Ana agreed with the sentiment, her emotions were far more tangled. Her parents had immigrated from Puerto Rico, yet she identified completely as American, something she felt oddly embarrassed to confess within this particular group. Ana's relationship with Ricardo had fizzled by the close of her year in Madrid. She admired his revolutionary zeal, but sustaining a long-distance romance would demand effort neither of them was prepared to give. They parted on amicable terms, and once she returned to the United States, Ricardo continued sending her letters along with books about Argentine revolutionaries. Ana graduated from the University of Virginia with a degree in foreign affairs the following year, eager to chart a new course in life. A friend mentioned an opening for a low-level clerical position at the Justice Department's Office of Privacy and Information Appeals in Washington, D.C. Being a clerk typist was hardly the world-changing opportunity Ana had envisioned. But it was steady, secure work, and conveniently close to her home in Baltimore. Just 4 months into her role at the Justice Department, Ana's supervisor summoned her to his office. She reminded herself she had done nothing wrong. She had kept her head down and performed her duties well, but an uneasy feeling crept in. Could they have uncovered her connection to Ricardo or the revolutionary books he sent her? Though she had passed her FBI background check, despite her growing disdain for the U.S. government, she worried her political leanings might have been noticed and flagged for further scrutiny. Ana entered the office, carefully wearing her best poker face. Her boss asked her to sit, and she nervously toyed with the hem of her skirt. She had only recently settled into a new apartment in Northwest D.C. If she lost this job, she might have to move back in with her mother. To her surprise, her boss informed her that she had been granted a top-secret security clearance. He admitted it was unusual to promote someone so new, but they were understaffed and needed additional clerks to process Freedom of Information Act requests. Suddenly, Ana found herself sifting through some of the nation's most sensitive security files, deciding what could be released to the media and public. She relished the added responsibility. Her sharp eye for detail and analytical skills impressed her superiors, earning her yet another promotion to legal technician. In just a short span, Ana had gone from an unemployed, communist-sympathizing college graduate to a trusted figure within the inner workings of America's intelligence apparatus. Ana idly pushed food around her plate as she considered her friend Marta's question. Marta had asked whether she would be willing to help Cuba in its support of the Sandinistas, des Nicaraguan revolutionaries fighting the American-backed Contras in the early 1980s. Marta explained that, by leveraging Ana's access to top-secret intelligence, the Cuban government could help shift the balance in Nicaragua. With Ana's cooperation, they could better anticipate and counter the Contras' brutal tactics. It sounded simple enough on the surface, but in reality, Marta was asking Ana to commit treason, to act as a spy for Cuba. It was December 1984, 5 years since Ana had joined the Justice Department. Keen to further her career, she had enrolled in the graduate program at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Immersed in her studies of global relations, Ana's socialist convictions had only solidified. Her friendship with Marta, a fellow student, had begun innocently bonding over their shared passion for world affairs and mutual outrage over U.S. involvement in Nicaragua. Marta, who was effortlessly outgoing, had coaxed Ana out of her shell, encouraging her to speak up for their shared ideals. What Ana did not know was that Marta was, in fact, a Cuban intelligence operative. Her time at Johns Hopkins was part of a recruitment strategy targeting promising students destined for influential government positions, particularly those disillusioned with U.S. policy. Students, exactly like Ana, that winter. Marta invited Ana to New York City for a pre-holiday trip to enjoy the sights, spend time together, and discuss helping the Nicaraguans resist the Contras. Marta had made a dinner reservation for 3 so Ana could meet her friend, who, she said, shared their concern for the Sandinistas. Over the meal, Marta posed her proposal. Ana didn't hesitate long. She felt an almost fated sense of purpose in aiding the Sandinistas and, by extension, supporting Cuba against the United States. To her, the U.S. government's backing of violent regimes was a betrayal, and betraying her country, in turn, seemed fitting. Marta congratulated her, while their dinner companion predicted Ana would become one of Cuba's finest assets. They toasted to the future. Upon returning home, Marta lent Ana a typewriter and instructed her to prepare a detailed biography for her new employers, urging her to describe her top-secret Justice Department position. Ana complied, unaware she was also providing a written catalog of her own psychological weak points information the Cubans could later use for blackmail. Not long after Ana had agreed to spy for Cuba, her sister Lucy called. Lucy said she was deeply inspired by Ana's dedication to the Justice Department and her faithful service to the country. In fact, she was so motivated by her sister's example that she had applied to join the FBI and had just been accepted. Ana was stunned. In an instant, her own sister had become an agent of the very state she had chosen to betray just months earlier. Lucy expected her to be thrilled, but Ana could barely hide her dismay. She made a half-hearted attempt to discourage her before ending the call. Suddenly, the prospect of espionage felt far more perilous. Still, Ana pressed ahead with plans to take a covert trip to Cuba alongside Marta. They were scheduled for an intensive 2-week crash course in spycraft, taught by former Soviet operatives. First, they traveled to Spain under the guise of a spring break holiday, where a Cuban agent provided them with forged passports to enter Havana. In Cuba, they learned to receive encrypted radio transmissions, lose surveillance tails, and even manipulate their anal sphincter muscles to control blood pressure techniques designed to fool polygraph tests. After 2 weeks of training, they worked their way back through Europe to Madrid, snapping tourist photos to legitimize their cover story. Back home, Ana was energized by the experience, but found it difficult to keep such a thrilling secret. She called her old friend, Mimi, whom she had met during her studies in Spain, and excitedly described her amazing trip to Cuba, complete with lectures at Cuban military bases, given that most Americans were prohibited from visiting Cuba at all. Ana's story raised obvious suspicions. She soon realized confiding in Mimi had been a mistake. Not long afterward, she cut off contact entirely. It would not be the last time she severed ties with someone she cared about. 8 years later, in 1993, Ana had perfected the espionage skills she'd first learned in Cuba, and she was applying them directly under the noses of her American employers. Once a week, she would leave her office at the Defense Intelligence Agency, return to her apartment, then head back out, always ensuring she wasn't being tailed. She drove to an upscale Washington neighborhood, a precaution she insisted upon. Even spies with top-secret clearance feared getting mugged. Inside a Chinese restaurant, she would take a seat for two, order water, and request egg rolls, the kind her handler preferred. About 10 minutes later, he would arrive casually, and they would engage in small talk about the news. To any onlooker, they were merely old friends catching up. No one paid attention when Ana slid a floppy disk across the table as she reached for an egg roll. By this point, Ana had firmly established herself as she regarded herself as the foremost authority on Cuban intelligence within the entire federal government. Her superiors had awarded her numerous commendations for her meticulous evaluations of intelligence gathered on the Cuban government and its operations. The simmering hostility between the United States and Cuba never truly cooled. Even throughout the 1990s, Ana was frequently summoned to brief high-ranking officials on Cuba's strategies, politics, and, above all, its espionage tactics. To keep her cover unshakable, Ana ensured her official work was both comprehensive and damaging to Cuba. It was a sacrifice the Cuban government was willing to accept in exchange for keeping one of their most valuable agents concealed. Ana saw herself as the dominant authority in the agency on Cuban affairs, and she bristled whenever someone dared to challenge her assessments. If colleagues voiced differing opinions, Ana made an example of them, half with polite professionalism, half with a sharp edge of derision. Among her peers at the DA, she earned the nickname Queen of Cuba. To them, she remained an enigma, reserved, intensely focused, and fiercely private. They assumed that whatever secrets she kept, there was a compelling reason, and they were right. While steadily climbing the ranks of U.S. intelligence, Ana was simultaneously funneling vast amounts of classified material to the Cubans. 3 nights a week, she would switch on her shortwave radio to receive coded instructions from Havana. She would then meet her handler over dinner, discreetly passing along an encrypted floppy disk containing intelligence and details of American counter-Cuba tactics. She disclosed information about a highly classified satellite program and exposed the real identities of more than 450 American operatives stationed in Cuba and Central America. But as her role became more prominent, it was no longer possible for her to simply walk out of the office with stolen files. Instead, Ana spent years honing her memorization skills until she could recall, word for word, the contents of thousands of documents, later passing them on to her Cuban contacts. Over the years, Ana traveled to Cuba twice under the guise of Defense Intelligence Agency fact-finding missions. During these visits, she would slip away under the cover of night to meet with high-ranking Cuban intelligence officials, just as American agencies decorated their own operatives. Her Cuban contacts rewarded her with accommodations and medals, tokens of appreciation for work that had directly led to the deaths or disappearances of American agents. But the strain of living this double life weighed heavily on her. She kept few friends and rarely dated. In an attempt to lift her spirits, Cuban intelligence even arranged a blind date with another agent. Yet, she felt no spark. More often than not, she sat alone in her apartment, sinking deeper into isolation and developing nervous habits. The greatest tension came from within her family. Sister Lucy had risen to prominence in the FBI, conducting national security investigations from their Miami office and had even married another agent. As Lucy's wedding approached, Ana could barely force a smile. Her sister repeatedly asked what was wrong, but Ana could not reveal that the problem was the growing number of FBI agents within her own family. Lucy encouraged their brother Tito and his wife to join the FBI as well. By the time Ana was known as the Queen of Cuba, 4 members of her immediate family had sworn oaths to uphold the U.S. Constitution as FBI agents. Family gatherings became dangerous minefields for her occasions where she could do nothing but remain silent, much like she did during her bi-weekly Chinese dinners with her Cuban handler. On the morning of February 24, 1996, Ana's phone rang. Lucy was on the other end, her voice tinged with concern. She seemed surprised to hear that Ana wasn't in the office. It was Saturday, the one day Ana could truly relax. Why would she be at work? Lucy cleared her throat and explained she had just seen a news broadcast. The Cuban government had shot down her brothers to the rescue plane. The news hit Ana like a punch to the gut. Brothers to the Rescue was a Miami-based group of Cuban exiles who flew missions to rescue defectors and drop anti-communist leaflets over the island. That day, 2 of their planes had entered Cuban airspace and were shot down by Cuban authorities, killing 4 people. Lucy called to ask what might happen next, but Ana could barely speak. The tension between the 2 nations she served had reached a boiling point. She would be expected to help guide the U.S. response while simultaneously trying to aid Cuba. Her superiors asked her to report to the office early the next morning. She arrived at the DA at 6 a.m. on Sunday and soon learned that the Joint Chiefs of Staff had formed a task force. Ana was summoned to participate. The United States had not considered direct military action against Cuba since the Bay of Pigs. Now, the possibility loomed large. She was tasked with briefing the Joint Chiefs on Cuba's military readiness and advising on the most effective retaliation strategies. Crossing the Potomac, she arrived at the Pentagon at 11 a.m. and spent the entire day updating the Joint Chiefs and monitoring fresh intelligence. The anxiety was unbearable. Strapped inside the Pentagon, she had no way to reach her Cuban handlers to relay U.S. counterstrike plans. By 8 p.m., she told her team she was exhausted and needed to leave. Her decision immediately raised suspicion. Analysts assigned to a Joint Chiefs task force were expected to remain at their posts until officially dismissed. Her early departure during the most serious U.S.-Cuba crisis in over 3 decades drew more than a few raised eyebrows. But Ana needed to make contact. Over the next 3 days, she continued to update her handlers as often as possible. One point, Cuban agent even stopped her in the street before her morning commuter reckless move, given the risk of being seen together. They feared the United States was preparing to strike. Despite the suspicion her actions caused, Ana successfully argued within the task force against military retaliation. In the end, the U.S. condemned the shootdown and imposed sanctions but refrained from military action. She had once again served Havana's interests, though her unusual departure from the Pentagon had set in motion the first domino that would eventually lead to her downfall. In 1998, during an FBI investigation into a network of Cuban spies in Miami, evidence surfaced that Havana had planted a mole in a higher-ranking position within the U.S. government. The FBI codenamed this mole Agent S, but knew little about their identity. They only knew that Agent S had met with someone whose initials were WD, had purchased a Toshiba laptop for espionage purposes, and had visited Guantanamo Bay in 1996. Beyond that, the trail was cold. For 2 years, the case stalled until it crossed the desk of Scott Carmichael, the DIA's senior counterintelligence investigator. It was his job to hunt down enemy operatives within their own ranks. Scott hardly fit the image of a spy hunter. People often joked he resembled comedian Chris Farley, and as a result, many underestimated him. But he was relentless, ambitious, and utterly committed to rooting out moles. When he began reviewing the evidence, Scott increasingly suspected that Agent S might be working inside the DEA. He examined the records of all officials who had visited Guantanamo Bay between July 4th and July 18th, 1996. The window identified by Miami investigators. When Ana Montes' name appeared on his screen, he felt a chill. Her visit perfectly matched the time frame, and it had occurred just 5 months before she had left work early during the Brothers to the Rescue crisis. Digging deeper, Scott recalled that Agent S had met someone with the initials WD Ana herself had mentioned. During a previous interview, working closely with William Dwyer, the chief of the FBI's counterintelligence division. The initials were a perfect match. Scott became convinced Ana was the mole. He took his findings to the FBI, but Special Agent Stephen McCoy, who headed the investigation, was skeptical. McCoy insisted the mole was a man just as 95% of spies historically were. For the next year, Scott fought too. Scott Carmichael eventually persuaded Special Agent McCoy that Agent S fell into that elusive 5%. At last, McCoy relented. He and his partner began to look closely into Ana, and almost immediately it became evident just how correct Carmichael had been. As they dug into her activities, they assigned her the code name Blue Wren, ensuring her identity would remain hidden throughout the operation. From that point on, the FBI monitored Ana, relentlessly tracking her every step, logging each keystroke, recording every phone conversation, even sifting through her trash, her apartment, and the contents of her purse. Among their discoveries were Ana's shortwave radio, unencrypted data stored on her computer's hard drive, and a sales receipt for a Toshiba laptop, the exact model that Cuban intelligence had instructed Agent S to purchase. The case against her was becoming indisputable, yet Ana remained blissfully unaware she was under investigation. It was Christmas morning, the year 2000, when Ana's niece and nephew burst into the guest room at her sister Lucy's home in Miami. Ana had come to spend the holidays there. Lucy, newly separated from her husband, thought it would be good for the children to enjoy extra time with their aunt. Together, Ana and Lucy joined the kids in the living room, watching them gleefully shred the wrapping paper from their gifts. Lucy lounged back on the couch, smiling, feeling at ease. Kina, however, sat rigid, her eyes glued to the children's every move, as though she were guarding them. Then, abruptly, she got up and began frantically collecting each scrap of wrapping paper almost the instant it touched the floor. Lucy, unsettled by her sister's sudden compulsive cleaning, quietly urged her to relax and enjoy the moment. In her mind, there was nothing to be tense about. But Lucy was wrong. Ana had plenty of reason to be tense. Ever since the FBI dismantled the Miami-based Cuban spy ring known as the WASP network, Ana's handlers had gone silent, leaving her entirely isolated. Even her former associate, Marta, had cut off all communication long ago to avoid suspicion. Ana was utterly alone. What Ana didn't know was that the person indirectly at the root of her predicament was sitting right beside her at the Christmas tree. Lucy herself had been part of the FBI task force that took down the WASP network, though. Of course, she had no idea that this involvement could put her own sister in jeopardy. By then, Ana desperately wanted to leave espionage behind. She was in her 40s, had a long-distance boyfriend and dreamed of building a life with him. It was impossible to intercept shortwave transmissions when he was around, especially because he, too, was an American analyst specializing in Cuban intelligence. The deception was eating away at her, making her feel that her entire existence was a fabrication. When she informed her handlers that she wished to retire from spy, she hoped they might thank her for her service and release her. Instead, they declined, subtly reminding her of the extensive incriminating information they had gathered over the years. Information, they implied, that could reach her employer should she ever betray their trust. By this point, Anna's obsessive-compulsive behaviors had escalated alarmingly. She would take showers lasting hours, scrubbing herself with painstaking thoroughness. Her diet consisted almost entirely of plain boiled potatoes. She drove wearing sun-protective gloves. She could not tolerate even the smallest trace of disorder, hence her manic clearing of Christmas wrapping paper the moment it landed on the carpet. Lucy began to realize her sister's personality was changing in unsettling ways. Wanting to help, she encouraged Anna to spend a few days with her boyfriend after Christmas, even though it meant ending their own holiday together early. But Anna refused. There was nothing Lucy could say to change her mind. The years of living a double life had left their mark, and the end of Anna's espionage career was now inevitable. By October 2001, the end had come. Lucy drove from their mother Amelia's home in Maryland, accompanied by Amelia, their brother Tito, and Tito's wife. The mood inside the vehicle was heavy, somber, almost like they were on their way to a funeral. But instead, their destination was a federal prison. Only 3 weeks earlier, Lucy had been working in the FBI's Miami office when her supervisor called her into his office. Walking down the hallway, she assumed it was related to a post-9/11 security matter. But when she entered, her boss explained the unthinkable. Her sister Anna had been arrested for espionage. Lucy's first stunned words were, "Is it true?" She could only stare in disbelief. Keith. Then, in an instant, years of distant and sometimes hostile behavior from Anna began to make sense. Lucy felt tears welling up, and for a moment she allowed herself to cry, then stopped. Her sister, the woman who had once been like a second mother to her, was a spy. A team of agents drove Lucy home, then spent hours interviewing her about Anna's activities. They did not suspect Lucy of wrongdoing. In fact, her role in the WASP network investigation made her a valuable source of context. Tito and his wife were also interviewed. Initially, they too struggled to believe it, but they trusted that if the Bureau had arrested and charged Anna, there was good reason. Tito was the one who broke the news to their mother. Amelia was devastated and able to reconcile the image of her intelligent, accomplished daughter with that of a traitor. Soon as her own FBI interview ended, Lucy made the long drive from Miami to Baltimore to be by her mother's side. The sight of Amelia's grief was heartbreaking. 3 weeks later, the family made the 3-hour drive to the Central Virginia Regional Jail. After passing through security, they entered the visitation area, where communication was only possible through a jail telephone. They waited a few minutes before Anna appeared, shuffling into view in a black and white striped jumpsuit. She sat down on the other side of the glass, offering a faint smile. To Lucy, it seemed Anna almost looked relieved, as though an enormous burden had been lifted. Amelia spoke to her between sobs, asking how she could have done something like this. Tito's words were harsher, condemning her for betraying both family and country. When it was Lucy's turn at the phone, she met her sister's gaze. Anna, though just a year older, had once been her protector, bathing her, walking her to school, speaking to her teachers during the dark years of their father's abuse. Even after Anna had grown emotionally distant, Lucy had admired her. She could have cried like Amelia. She could have lashed out like Tito, but the only question she could summon was quiet, direct. "What made you think you wouldn't get caught?" Anna held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. She refused to answer at all. When Ana Montes was arrested, the public barely noticed. The attacks of September 11th had left the country consumed with other threats. But in reality, her work had placed American lives in danger. At least one Green Beret in Nicaragua had been killed as a direct result of intelligence she provided to her Cuban handlers. The fate of the American operatives she exposed in Cuba remains unknown. Her case posed a particular challenge for the U.S. intelligence community: how to deal with the so-called true believer spy. Most turncoat government analysts betrayed their country for financial gain. Ana acted out of ideological conviction, utterly certain she was morally justified. She was never paid for her services, only a few $1,000s from the Cubans to settle her student loans and purchase the Toshiba laptop they had requested. For counterintelligence officers like Scott Carmichael, pursuing a true believer is uniquely difficult. There is no money trail to follow. And ideological spies often leave far fewer clues, while being more motivated to maintain secrecy. Although Ana excelled at hiding her double life, the federal intelligence system made it easier for her by repeatedly cutting corners on security. When she joined the Defense Intelligence Agency in 1984, the Personal Security Division simply accepted the FBI background check done 5 years earlier for a Justice Department job. It had never been updated, overlooking her connection to Marta, her secret trip to Cuba, and her drug use in graduate school. Within just 2 days of being hired, she was granted interim top-secret clearance. She never had to take a polygraph or undergo the psychological testing required at the CIA or NSA. 4 months later, she was granted full top-secret clearance, giving her access to highly classified intelligence on U.S. military operations in Nicaragua and El Salvador, all based on an outdated background review. Even after the Brothers to the Rescue incident, when she left the Pentagon early, raising suspicion among co-workers, Ana's career advanced. Despite being flagged as a possible security risk, her supervisors nominated her for the Exceptional Impact Promotion Program, awarding her the prestigious GG-14 ranker promotion that came with higher pay and greater responsibilities. It was only after her arrest that the DA finally updated its security protocols, hoping to prevent such oversights in the future. At her trial, Ana argued that U.S. policy toward Cuba was excessively harsh. She claimed her actions were meant to bring the two nations closer together. For her betrayal, she received a 25-year sentence in a maximum security prison, voiding the death penalty. The abuse she suffered from her father, combined with the influence of her romantic partner and certain friends, may have contributed to her disillusionment with America. But the choice to become a spy was hers alone. Had she truly wanted reconciliation between Cuba and the United States, she might have pursued the path of diplomacy instead of treachery. Living to lives nearly destroyed her mentally. For nearly 2 decades, she lied to everyone she knew. Her family still struggles to understand how she could betray them so completely. On January 6, 2023, Ana was released from prison. She relocated to Puerto Rico, stating that she wished to live quietly and privately. As of now, her family remains only a distant presence in her life.